which was, for those of you that are new to this group and this network, it was born out of a session that we ran, and a lot of the North East business leaders actually suggested that it was a good idea to have something that was just purely North East focused, so that we could deal with challenges that we have as a region, and so that we could be stronger as a region in being a more inclusive area to live and work. And we're absolutely delighted in the momentum that the group is growing. If you haven't already joined the LinkedIn group, Louise will be popping into the chat button the link so that you can go in and join the group. And then that just means that you don't miss out on any future events and topics. And there's a lot of good posts being put in there at the moment, so that's fantastic. So on behalf of NRG and Green Bean, I'd like to welcome you all for joining us today. Thanks very much for giving up your time. Hopefully you'll find it of benefit and learn a lot more about certain areas of conscious inclusion, diversity, and what other businesses are doing. So you're not here to hear from me today, although I can talk for England. I just want to introduce our speaker who's taken the spotlight today, and it's a lady called Nusheen Hussain, and she is the Executive Director of Business Development at Home Group. So she champions ED&I throughout her organisation at an executive level. She's extremely passionate about the whole topic. She's got a big background in championing this within every business she's worked in. Previously, she's worked in construction, financial services, broadcasting, and now she's working for the social housing provider Home Group. We're absolutely delighted to have her here today and talk about her journey and what she's doing to champion ED&I within her organisation. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Nusheen. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you for having me. I'm going to start with a bit of a warning, actually. So, this comes with the joys of home working. My doorbell is extremely loud and I'm the only one at home at the moment. So if it does go off, apologies in advance, it will make you jump. So yes, that's the warning over. So I'll start I've got a slide deck for you, but before we move on to that, I'll start with a bit about me. I know Julie's kind of alluded to a few bits. So I was born and brought up in London. And when I moved to Newcastle back in 2003, one of the first things I noticed was, wow, this city is very white. And that was even more so within workplaces here. And so I knew my work was cut out. And throughout my life, both in London and in Newcastle, I've always worked in male-dominated sectors like financial services, construction, energy, broadcasting, and I'm sure there's many women here today who are or have also worked in these sectors and so know the score. And when it gets to that mid-level where, you know, the invisible barriers to progression are in full force, you know, we know it's tough. And here's a not so fun fact. So the gender pay gap is 0 below the age of 40, and above the age of 40, it increases to more than 10. And that is a telling figure. So working for Home Group and the housing sector was a refreshing change because we have a 64 to 36% female to male ratio, and we have such strength in the culture that underpins everything we do. And being a woman of colour, I face that dual intersectionality every day. But my motto is, why fit in when you're born to stand out, right? So actually, it's really important that organisations embrace this diversity and allow people to be themselves. And we've got a slogan at Home Group, which is "Be yourself at home," and that is really important. We live by that every day. So diverse experience and perspective within the workplace is fundamental to the success of an organisation. And I haven't just made that up. Organisations that have more diverse teams have 36% better financial returns, and that's a fact from the Race at Work report. So there's been a lot of talk about equality, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, And a lot of this has been triggered by the recent terrible murder of George Floyd, the BLM movement, Brexit and immigration, and the impact that the pandemic has had on BAME individuals. But now we all have to move from just talking to actually doing. So Louise, if you don't mind launching the slide deck for me, that would be brilliant. Thank you. And if we can move on to slide 1, please. Excellent. So at Home Group, we have a huge role to play because of who we are and what we do, and the role we have in the diverse communities we serve. We're on that journey and we've picked up a few accolades along the way, but I think, you know, that's not what this is about. It's about continuously striving for improvement in equality, diversity and inclusion, because it's morally and ethically the right thing to do. Can we completely eliminate inequality from the workplace? I think not, because unfortunately it's so deeply ingrained within our history, our society, within organisations, both systematically and also culturally. And I think first and foremost, we must acknowledge that inequality exists. And that is the hardest part. Quite often I see organisations talk about inequality as if it's happening over there outside of their organisation, or it's something that HR departments do and it's not our own role and responsibility, but actually it's everyone's responsibility within the workplace to ensure that we all strive for equality, diversity and inclusion. And here's a not so fun fact. Did you know, for example, in 2019, there were just 5 women CEOs in the FTSE 100 companies. Now that's a really stark statistic. And at the current rate, what that means is it will take more than 80 years before women achieve equality at CEO level. And it's also worth noting that the highest paid male CEO within the FTSE top 100 companies earns more than 90% than the most highest paid CEO female. Again, a very stark but true statistic in terms of where we are. And so, although a lot of progress has been made, which is brilliant, there is still a long, long way to go. So it's a tough nut to crack, but we can always do more to make improvements, and by constantly chipping away, and lots of small changes collectively lead to that big change. So we've just got to keep on at it. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at Home Group to promote equality, diversity and inclusion. And by the way, this list is by no means exhaustive. It just gives you a flavour for some of the things that we've put in place. So firstly, it's important to say that our culture underpins all of this and is fundamental to our success. And we've worked really, really hard to develop a culture that provides clarity on expectations and behaviours. Our culture programme, which is called Living Our Values, is attended by everyone from our concierge, our support workers, to even our CEO. And it is very clear on employee behaviours. It reinforces our values and is embedded into our policies and people management practices. We have very clear equality, diversity and inclusion policy, but it's not just about words on a paper. We have an equality, diversity and inclusion plan with very clear KPIs and a steering group of colleagues that meets quarterly to discuss the progress against our plan. We've got 5 colleague networks. So we have Partners in Pride, and that's run by our LGBTQ+ colleagues. We've got 602 members. As part of that, we have a disabilities network, which has 96 members, Lean In Women's Network, which has 255 colleague members. We have a multicultural group, which has 369 BAME colleagues. And we've recently introduced a mental health network, which just over 2 weeks ago, and that already has 176 members. And I cannot stress the importance of support from allies for these colleague networks. So we've got allies which support each of these networks, and I think it's really important that we see more managers and senior leaders as allies within the workplace. Quite often in workplaces, it is the manager roles where we find those invisible barriers that prevent or slow down equality, diversity and inclusion. We've signed up to the Race at Work Charter, which is a nationally recognised framework, and it means that we will take 5 clear actions. Appoint an exec sponsor for race, and that's me. I'm very pleased to say I'm very passionate about championing race equality and inclusion within the workplace, and that means a lot to me personally because of my own personal experience. We capture ethnicity data and publicise it, so our ethnicity pay gap. We commit to zero tolerance of harassment and bullying, and we make it clear to everyone that supporting equality in the workplace is the responsibility of all leaders and managers. And finally, we take positive action to support ethnic minority career progression. And as we go through my presentation today, you will see the actions that we've taken to do this. We've introduced the Rooney Rule across our recruitment practices, and what that means is that we'll take positive action to shortlist women and BAME candidates for interviews for manager level roles. And taking positive action is very different to positive discrimination, and it's important that organisations understand the difference between the two. We capture and publicise our ethnicity pay gap and gender pay gap data, and you'll find that on our transparency section within our website, and we track our year-on-year progress against this. To support career progression, we've introduced leadership programmes for women and also more recently for our BAME colleagues. Our Women in Leadership programme saw a 32% attendees gain promotions within 6 months of having completed the programme, which was a fantastic result. We hope to replicate that or even improve that statistic for our BAME colleagues' career progression who are currently participating in our BAME leadership programme. And as of last week, we signed up to the HALO code, and that is to stop Afro-textured hair discrimination in the workplace. And yes, believe it or not, this still happens today, where a member of staff gets told that they don't look smart enough because of their hair being too messy, or to the more subtle microaggressions like, how long does it take to do your hair? What's the process? How long does it last? And these can all bring about anxieties for the person who's being subjected to these comments. I think it's important to note that these aren't compliments. They have negative connotations. They are, in fact, microaggressions. And I think it's important that we recognise that. Next slide, please.
Has that not worked?
Not yet. Let's have a look.
What are we doing?
There we
Second
go.
slide. Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. All right, every year we hold an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion conference, and this is open to all colleagues nationally, but also to our suppliers. And we have a fantastic lineup of expert speakers. This year we had John Amici, and for those of you who haven't come across him, I would urge you to watch his BBC Bite Size on white privilege. It's only a couple of minutes long, which is always a good thing, but it's absolutely brilliant. So do have a look at that. John Amici on BBC Bite Size. As part of our learning and development, we've created racial bias and inclusion training with mandatory modules for all colleagues. And I know that pretty much all organisations now have e-learning or learning and development based on racial bias, unconscious bias, but that's not enough. It's the whole culture piece and also the senior leadership piece that goes around that to really embed what we're trying to do here in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. It's not just a tick box exercise to say, right, we've launched the training, that's it, job done. We celebrate diversity and embrace difference through role models. So from across the organisation, we have colleagues from underrepresented groups who tell us about their stories and why they chose to be a role model. And our role models are aware of their potential to influence others by being open about their lives. They help to create a more inclusive workplace. I'm a role model, and we all know the power of storytelling, especially when it's a real life story. We hold life swap sessions where our role models can spend time with colleagues, customers and stakeholders, telling them about their journey and what it's like to be in their shoes. And this is a really powerful way of breaking down barriers, improving relationships, challenging stereotypes and creating positive change. Our junior members of staff from underrepresented groups are reverse mentors. And for those organisations who haven't introduced reverse mentoring, I strongly recommend it, because what this does, it allows junior members to have that exposure and create that awareness, provide an alternative perspective and create that all-important dialogue with senior leaders across the organisation. And it gives senior leaders an insight into what's actually going on a grassroots level across the organisation. But it also means, because it's a two-way relationship, what it also means is that our reverse mentors get that exposure, it helps them build confidence, and it brokers relationships that they may not otherwise have had. So it also improves career progression for our underrepresented colleagues. We offer skilled refugees employment through our Refugees into Sustainable Employment programme, which we're really very, very proud of. Next slide, please, Louise. Okay, so customers are at the heart of everything that we do. And we've introduced our onboard customer training programme, which helps our customers prepare for a board level appointment. And we have 2 customers on our board, which I'm really, really proud of, because our customers give us first-hand insight in terms of what it's like to receive the service that we provide. And we see so many golden nuggets of information coming through that help us improve what we're doing. And the training also helps customers who may not want to join our board, but may be interested in a board level appointment for a charity or a community organisation. And we also help remove barriers for training and employment by supporting our customer aspirations. There's some exciting work going on in our procurement team at the moment to help our supply chain align to our equality, diversity and inclusion goals. These include training, supplier focus days, access to all of our resources, and we'll be asking our suppliers to share key data about their equality, diversity and inclusion metrics. So how many women they have in employment, for example, people with disabilities and so on, so that we can see our suppliers are truly embracing equality, diversity and inclusion. You know, there's hundreds of thousands, even millions of pounds that go from us to our suppliers, and it's important to understand the influence we therefore have within our supply chain, and utilising that influence to create positive impact, to create positive change is so important and so powerful. I'll end with our recent Employer of Change campaign, and we did this to attract more diverse candidates into Home Group, and this gained huge engagement. And if we just flip over to the next slide, please, Louise. Thank you. You'll see that this is a very powerful and thought-provoking campaign which helps create positive change. So I hope this gives you some food for thought. and some actions to take away and implement within your own workplace. And I do hope we see more organisations going from just saying they're inclusive to actually backing it up with meaningful actions. Thank you. That's it from me. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Nusheen, that was absolutely fantastic. I've picked out quite a few things there, and particularly around microaggressions, that being somebody without a filter, that has really resonated to me, to actually appreciate that could come across as microaggressions. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to open the floor to questions now. Has anybody got anything they want to ask or anything they want to comment? Particularly around the Employer of Choice campaign. I thought that was absolutely brilliant as well.
Can I just chip in as a white, straight male? I've never intentionally given microaggressions, but and I've never ever looked at somebody's gender or race or where they fit into the LGBTQ or whatever the initials are now. And I just naturally include people. But in order to do that, I have to ask questions to help me mold around them, or, you know, we mold together. So curiosity doesn't always equal aggression, whether it's microaggression or otherwise. So I am a bit concerned that people think it's a microaggression when it's not. And they always assume that it is. So I think we just need to be careful on that. Not everyone's intentions are what you think they are.
Nusheen, have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. And that's a really important point, because sometimes, you know, we assume, you know, positive intent, and actually it can be taken the wrong way. So I think it's important to create that safe zone to be able to have those open dialogues, and actually for, you know, the other party to assume positive intent. But I think it's important to kind of set that scene and that understanding in the first instance before you launch directly into asking, you know, sometimes quite personal questions that can be taken as a kind of, you know, personal insult, and that's really, really very important. But, you know, providing that safe zone to have that dialogue, which is something that, you know, we do when we set up role model conversations or reverse mentoring. There's actually an agreement between the parties exchanging dialogue to say, look, you know, this is a safe zone. Do ask me questions. I might not want to answer all of the questions because, you know, some questions might upset me, but, you know, I'm happy to have that dialogue with you.
Great, thank you, Nusheen. There's more questions coming in the chat box. So we've got one from Hannah saying, that was so inspiring, thank you. Can you share your thoughts on the use of BAME as a descriptor?
Yeah, I mean, we actually chose not to use BAME as a descriptor because we call our BAME colleague network our multicultural group for the very reason that, you know, being called a minority is in itself kind of putting a label on those from a minority group. However, we do, when we have this kind of rich dialogue, have to describe it in a certain way. And the fact that, you know, the group is known as BAME across, you know, government policies and legislation, etc., we do have to refer to the group as BAME. However, there are negative connotations associated with it because we know within the world, the population is largely black or brown rather than white, and actually is a majority. So, you know that in itself speaks volumes.
Brilliant. The next one we have is from Lucy. Could you discuss the reverse mentoring a bit more, specifically an example of how it's been a success?
Yeah, so what we've done is when we launched our reverse mentoring program with our LGBTQ+ colleagues, we decided to launch it with our executive team and our CEO. So we had 5 reverse mentors, so junior members, junior colleagues within Home Group. have that one-to-one meeting with our executive team to create that dialogue, that awareness, and share the right terminology, how to refer to someone in terms of their sexual orientation, for example. And that was very, very powerful indeed. And we also had the opportunity to share personal lived experiences, and our executive team and our CEO learnt a lot from that, and we've replicated that for our multicultural colleagues as well. And it just, first of all, these underrepresented colleagues become ambassadors across the organisation, which in itself is really powerful. And you see, it acts as a catalyst for career progression for those people who you would never readily see, or people who wouldn't readily get that exposure across the organisation. So really, really powerful stuff.
Great. We've got a question from Helen. How do you keep the momentum going on staff network groups? Often seem to rely on a small number of active participants.
Yeah, we're really fortunate, Helen, to have a platform which is powered by Facebook, and it's called Workplace, and it acts like, back in the day, the intranet, but it's a Facebook version which allows us to have that continuous dialogue, to share, news stories, share champions in history, for example, and it creates a really rich ongoing dialogue for those colleagues who are running the colleague network across the organisation. And I would very much recommend a platform or a tool, especially now that so many people are home working, to enable that communication to be transcended across the organisation.
Brilliant. We've got a comment from Di saying, I think we need to be consciously curious and gather understanding rather than those subtle microaggressions that aren't conscious. And then we have a question coming in from Gillian. I notice you still have women network groups despite already being a top employer for women. How do you deal with the challenge often given that women have it good here, so why do they need special treatment?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the recent argument that came about as a result of the BLM movement. So why do Black Lives Matter? Shouldn't all lives matter? And it's a similar parallel to the question that has been asked there, because the statistics show and the events show that there is a problem, and we have to continuously keep that momentum going to make sure that those statistics head in the right direction. We do have problems in terms of gender equality within the workplace. We do have problems with racial equality within the workplace, and we've got to continuously chip away at it.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Therese. Can you give us examples of positive impact as opposed to positive discrimination?
Yes, so going back to the Rooney Rule example the policy that we've adopted. So if we have taken the positive action to shortlist females, for example, for a senior level manager role, and we have two candidates, a male and a female, who are equally skilled and experienced, and conducted an interview with equal points, essentially, we would take positive action to select the female candidate for that role. And that is positive action. So positive discrimination would be if the male candidate outperformed the female candidate and we then selected the female candidate. That is positive discrimination. So where there is equal performance between the female and the male candidate, we have taken positive action to select the female candidate over the male. I hope that clarifies that point.
Okay. And we've got, I've never seen as many questions coming in through the chat box. This is great. Sorry, we keep firing them at you, Nusheen. Do you report on pay gaps for LGBTQ and disability too? And would you advise smaller employers to similarly share, even if small numbers could radically skew the percentage based on one or two recruitment?
Look, I would advise that, we should report on equality pay gap across all underrepresented groups. I think the hard part is collating the data in the first instance. So, for example, 17% of our data is based on I prefer not to say, and that is the most difficult bit, because sometimes trust becomes an issue. I know, for example, all the previous employers that I worked with, I was not comfortable in giving my ethnicity information because I felt that somehow I would be discriminated against based on that information. So first and foremost, it's about organisations creating that trust and creating that understanding with the member of staff as to what they're going to actually do with that data, and that enables the organisation to get a true picture of gender pay gap, or BAME pay gap, or be it LGBT or disability.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Aurora. In terms of the Rooney Rule, do you communicate that during recruitment that you would do that?
Yes, we do. We're very upfront and transparent about that.
Okay. And we have a question from John. A high percentage of prefer not to say is an endemic and enduring challenge.
Yeah, and just going back to my example, throughout my life, I was, not happy to provide that information because I didn't know what organisations would do with it. But when I joined Home Group, I was happy to share that information, actually, because the organisation gave me confidence in terms of what they were actually doing with that data, and that is very, very important.
Great. Okay. Have we got any more coming through? Any more questions anybody's got to ask, or any comments on the progress that you think Home Group have made towards becoming a fully inclusive employer? What are your thoughts on their recruitment campaign that Nusheen showed on the last slide? No.
There's plenty of positive intention. Am I on mute?
Oh, we've got a question from Therese there.
Oh, no, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut across Mark there. It wasn't really a question, it was just an observation. I saw that campaign when it went out live, and it was very impactful. But it'd be interesting to see what the outputs were, Nusheen. Did it deliver what was anticipated?
Yeah, I mean, it's been our most successful online campaign to date, and actually we saw a flurry of online engagement saying, wow, this is an amazing thing that Home Group are doing, lots of positive comments. But in addition to that, for all of the roles that we were advertising at the time the campaign was live, attracted a 3% increase in underrepresented candidates across all underrepresented groups, which was brilliant to see. So, direct correlation there.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious of time. We've got just a few minutes left because we try to keep these as short and sweet sessions. So if anybody's got any more burning questions, now's the time, or if anybody wants to come off mute and ask Nusheen a question or comment on anything, or maybe talk about what's happening within your organisation, because I know we've got quite a mix of organisations on here now. We've got a lot from social housing, but we've also got from big blue chip organisations too. Would anybody like to come on and comment about what they're doing in their organisation or similarities? Is anyone doing anything similar?
I have a question, but it's not that. I was interested because this is so diverse, and it's, the topic is just so diverse. I'm really interested to understand the journey. What did the Home Group look like, for instance, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? How did you start? What did you start with? How did you then build on this? Because there's just so much, you can't tackle everything in one go. And I'm really interested to hear that.
That's a great question, Jill.
Very good question. Yes, thank you, Jill. So our chief exec joined the organisation, I think, over 11 years ago now. And one of the first things he said when he joined was, this organisation is too white. And, and that sets a precedent. And I think it has to come from the top. That kind of willingness to change has to come from the top. I've seen organisations who have you know, colleague network. So universities, for example, very good example, and apologies to anyone who represents universities here today, but, you know, universities rely heavily on international student fees, right? So you've got huge amounts of you know, BAME students coming in, which make up the revenue for a university. However, when you look at university statistics, very white, male dominated in terms of staff. So, you know, there's work to be done there in terms of creating that, you know, target customer versus the staff who are actually serving that customer. I think, you know, we've been on a journey, a big journey, and I think we're accelerating huge amounts of pace, certainly over the last 5 years. And I'm really pleased to say, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but, you know, since I joined 2 years ago, we've really accelerated pace with regards to race equality within the workplace. And, you know, we've got a huge colleague network who really believe in it, believe in the change, and believe that we can continue to accelerate that pace simply because they have the support of an executive who's really championing it. And I cannot put in words the importance of that.
And I think the business benefit that you outlined and the figures at the very beginning of your presentation really hit home in anybody trying to change the mindset of an exec leadership team, I guess, as well as show them the numbers of what a difference it could make. Okay, well, if anybody else wants to come off mute, has any more questions? Or
I've got one quick one, if that's all right. What does success look like percentage-wise, and how will you know that you've been successful or you've reached success?
That's a very good question, and I think it's down to looking at the statistics as they stand right now against the population mix as a benchmark. So, you know, and when I say population mix, I mean the working age and diversity within the UK population that is at that working age versus the mix that we have within our organisation, and that is really important. But the other thing is to ensure that those people who are working within our organisation feel safe, feel proud to be working within the organisation that they work in.
Will that answer that, Mark, for you? Great. Okay.
Hold on, hang on. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody, anything else? No. I'm sure everybody would agree it's been a fascinating brief session today, but with a lot of punch in there. Nusheen, thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today. Are you happy if anybody wants to reach out to you on the LinkedIn group to answer any questions, or if anybody's got any thoughts afterwards? Would that be okay if we can direct everything into the LinkedIn group?
Of course, Julie, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
That's brilliant.